Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Fraternity Foodie. My name is Mike Ayalon. I am your host. This is episode number 44 of Fraternity Foodie, and we call these segments Fraternity Foodie because there is nothing like great food to bring people together. Today, we are going to be talking to perhaps the world's leading expert on the subject of hazing. So everybody tuning in today should be listening very, very carefully to every word of this podcast. I have been reading his research for decades, and frankly, I just feel fortunate to know him and to be his friend. His name is Hank Nuwer. He is somebody who is the author of Hazing, Destroying Young Lives, Wrongs of Passage, High School Hazing, and the Hazing Reader. He is now a speaker for Greek University, and he brings programs on hazing prevention to students all over North America and all over the world. Welcome to the show, Hank.
Oh, thank you, Mike. I'm really excited to be here and talking about food. What could be better?
That's right. I mean, talking about food, I'm so passionate about food. I'm glad that you share that same passion because that's one thing everybody can agree on. We might be looking at an issue from different lenses, but at the end of the day, we look at a pastrami sandwich from a New York City deli the same way. Let's get started.
We agree from beginning to end until they say who's picking up the check.
That's right. You are 100% correct with that. Now, Hank, I have to tell you, okay, I am blessed to know you and to work with you for the rest of my life. I will never forget when you and your beautiful wife, you guys walked into my hazing prevention session at NGLA conference in Baltimore. You sat down in the audience, both of you. And now in my head, I'm thinking to myself, I better be on my game today or else, right? All of today's speakers on hazing prevention, no matter who they are, and there are many talented people in our field, all of us owe you a debt of gratitude for your work in our field to help end hazing on this planet. So please tell our audience, how did this mission of hazing prevention start for you?
Okay, and first I should say I owe a debt to these amazing sources that I started with in the 1970s, which we can talk about a little bit later. But how it started would be, when it started really, I hadn't thought much about hazing. We had in my fraternity the stupid stuff, which would be errands and so forth. I didn't have it that bad, but one of the things which was difficult is that I played ball and I had a job and I went to classes. And so they would have some mandatory, I would call them diddly things at the time. And you either went to it or they gave you the nickname of the Phantom. So there was sleep deprivation there, but nothing that even approached criminal. And in this generation, you could drink at 18, so it wasn't a big deal. There was never any forced drinking, which you know too well is the most dangerous part for most of our fraternities at this time. Mm-hmm. But we had the errands, the little stuff. Saying that, I didn't see a real problem with hazing when I went to Nevada, Reno as a grad assistant. I played some rugby with a group called the Sundowners. I knew them. Today, I would call them acquaintances. Then, you know what it's like in college, you call them your friends. Mm-hmm. And their initiations were done right in front of the administration, the faculty. And this was typical of the 1970s. You would find the hazing pictures in yearbooks all the time. If the internet were around then, you would see the videos. The Sundowners were the most intense of an intense group, and not the only one, because Nevada, Reno has had 3 hazing deaths since then. But I want to say it was a wonderful place to be with great people, great campus, lovely city. But the Sundowners used alcohol at that time in a very dangerous way. If you know, and I know you do, the death of Max Groover at LSU, 190 proof alcohol was involved in a game where if you answered the wrong questions, you had to guzzle this down.
Mhm.
That's what the sundowner initiation was, but perhaps more intense even than that, because they would make people drink. When the fumes came out of somebody's mouth, they throw a match in a direction, and it was almost like seeing a flame coming out of people's mouth, like in a circus, and very dangerous, and there were burnt lips. Long and the short of it is, they did so many that I ended up seeing 3, and on the 3rd one, I was in Little Waldorf, which was their quote unquote clubhouse bar. Very friendly place usually. This time it was raucous because they were doing their initiation. There was a young man on the floor under the pool table frothing at the mouth. First and only time in my life I had seen this. And of course, I'm walking in dead sober into the place. I recognized some people I played ball with. I had been graduate student body president. Prior to that, I knew the undergrad officers. I didn't have to fight to ask them to take the young man outside and to stop what they were doing with him. They kind of shrugged. They were drinking themselves, shrugged, took him outside. This is the bad part. At that particular site, and that's why I stress bystander intervention, I should have called 911. I was very lucky that this young man survived, was helped by these people who were actually good people at heart, that I would vouch for, would feel comfortable today leaving a son or daughter with for babysitting, but had this dangerous initiation. Long and the short of it is, the next time they did it, maybe because it was public, maybe because there were people commenting on it, including myself, they moved it to a Native American reservation, Pyramid Lake. And this time, same amount of alcohol, and one person, it only takes one, pummeling the pledges with his fists. We had John Davies, a giant of a man who played for Division I Nevada Wolfpack, die, and another one had some brain damage, and he unfortunately died in a pedestrian accident just a few years later. So I look at it as either a single tragedy or maybe even a double tragedy. That gave me the impetus to say, what is going on here in terms of behavior? I was a literature major, but my true calling is probably human behavior, psychology, sociology. I approached a journal called Human Behavior Magazine, which was a rival to Psychology Today, which is still around, and asked to do an article called The Dead Souls of Hell Week. It was started right after this death. I started in about 76. I was teaching an extension course on creative writing for UCLA, so I had great library to work from. And I started going through New York Times indexes as far back as they could and looked for the word hazing and initiations. Those are my key words to start.
Mm-hmm.
So I was the one that did a database going way back into the 70s. A woman an activist by the name of Eileen Stevens later did it, and she introduced me to LexisNexis, which helped me do more searches, and that list scarily started growing and growing. So the first database was printed in October 1978 for Human Behavior magazine. I'm still keeping it, Mike. In the last week, I found 4 more adult secret society deaths in Masonic and other organizations, a Catholic organization for adult men. I'm still finding them for this new book, which, as you said, is called Hazing in American Culture. Oh. And I've gone from just looking into fraternity deaths, into athletic, into job, into adult secret societies, and internationally, India, Philippines, Indonesia, Netherlands, on and on, South Africa, on and on. And I've been in touch with a lot of scholars all the way out, for example, in Brazil, who have the same interest in hazing. And it's not only a fraternity problem, although the most deaths do come, especially with alcohol in fraternities, it's an international problem. And I look at it as a human rights problem and my life's mission in a way to try to see it subside. I'm not foolish enough to think it can end in my lifetime, although I expect to live to 100. Human nature, it will come back again and again, but we can make it clear that society does not approve of this behavior and make it like drunk driving is regarded today. It wasn't regarded that way in the 60s and 70s. Mm-hmm. Others Against Drunk Driving did this.
Yeah.
Work you're doing and many, many others, I'm just part of this team, I think will make it taboo to haze in the future, especially to use violence or alcohol in an initiation.
Wow. Many people might know this. You're a member of Sigma Tau Rho Fraternity, which is no longer in operation today. Can you give us some insight into what that experience of being in a fraternity was like for you?
Okay, and I think probably historically, in a couple sentences, you might want to know that I came in the post-era, immediately after there was a lot of controversy about the constitutions of many national fraternities. At that time, the undergrads were the ones rebelling, and a few very stalwart national directors who were trying to get the constitutions changed. Then there were some who wanted to keep the old way, and African Americans were excluded. There were anti-Semitic fraternity clauses in constitutions. Therefore, as an undergrad at the State University of New York historically, you should know that the chancellor made a decision to cancel all the national and international fraternities in all the SUNY schools. This is important for two reasons. Number one, I'm now a member of Sigma Tau Rho, but it had been Sigma Tau Gamma, national group often associated with teachers' colleges at the time. And this went on and on for Delta Kappa and a lot of the other ones, all had changed. This led to Sig Tau Rho, which wasn't, as we talked about theirs, wasn't completely pure, but it wasn't a criminal organization. But other groups all across New York, these locals could be very dangerous. There's no more national in charge. They're not going to conclaves, conventions, and so forth. They're not having people come to campus and do inspections. So we're talking today at Geneseo, at Plattsburgh, University of Buffalo, as you know, these SUNY schools had a culture of hazing inculcated during that same period of the 60s and early 70s when Greeks were banned from SUNY schools. It was my national, not myself. I wasn't educated enough about the matter, who I remember it was a Dr. Weinbrenner who was in charge and leading the charge at the time, took on the chancellor, and the lawsuit ended on the courthouse steps, and nationals came back to SUNY schools. A good thing, a very good thing. The bad thing, groups like the Pigs at Geneseo, which had a death, as you know, a once good local fraternity at Plattsburgh that turned into a bunch of renegades with a lot of influence from alums, by the way, and had a water torture death of Walter Dean Jennings, who was given so much water and his body chemistry changed. Albany, SUNY, a wonderful place to be, wonderful place to graduate. I have had the honor of being a distinguished alum in '99 and getting a Doctor of Humane Letters in 2006 for the hazing humanitarian work. I love the SUNY system, but somehow, some way, the renegade chapters that sprouted in the 60s and 70s have to be taken away. Why? The average journalist or public person who doesn't know Greek life, it's alphabet soup to them when there's a death and a renegade group does it. Often happens. It even happens sometimes that people will assume the letters of a real chapter, like Omega Sci-Fi has had this happen, and a death occurs, and the national and the local had nothing to do with it. And so that's a big problem now with it. So that's the long and the short of it, how I got into it. Very, very deep Greek background. Today, we have a gentleman who keeps us all together. Unfortunately, at my age, a lot of the times, and several times a year, we get the announcement that there's a death. We immediately get our cards out, our emails, our support, and those in Buffalo who are still around go to the funeral. It's still supportive to this day, many years later. We have a newsletter. For a time, I had a web page for the group that I did. And I would say for a group of old alums, we're very much involved. Unfortunately, that Sig Tau Gamma group went away for dues, not for hazing, some time past. I wish it would come back, and I would get involved if it did come back.
Wow. Okay, that's good to know. Tell us a little bit about the history. I'm trying to understand, how did hazing infiltrate American academia?
Great question. And I think what we point out is that hazing is a great part of American culture, but it didn't come from there. It was brought in by the scholars who taught at schools such as Harvard and Yale in the early years of the colonies, something that I'm researching for this book, and was thought to be something that unified the group. It was going to put in their place those callow freshmen coming in so that they knew where they belonged on the pecking scale, but also raised school spirit and stopped something that you might not have thought about, hazing against the new faculty members. Where, for example, at Lehigh, I think the gentleman's name was Bronner, Professor Bronner, was thrown into a river by the students at that time. And I'm finding example after example of professor hazing in the 1800s and early 1900s, which will be included in a chapter in the book.
Wow.
So that's how it came in. It didn't come into those universities overnight either. It went back to the time of St. Augustine and possibly Plato. St. Augustine himself wrote about it in the Confessions, and his group was called the Destroyers, and they wreaked havoc on the campus and put terror into the hearts of the new students, who then were teenagers, of course.
Wow. So what about the professions? How did hazing infiltrate professions? I'm thinking of police. I'm thinking of nursing. I've even heard the story of hazing between football referees from a very good mutual friend of both of ours. So it seems like it's everywhere. Is that true?
It is, and if you think about it, it's not a very difficult answer. This goes back to the guilds in the medieval time, when basically we had apprentices and you had to prove your worth. And a master put a lot of time into the apprentices and wanted to make sure they were worthy. And so this went in at the time into those professions. And I have to tell you that on the job, I was hazed working for a steel company, Donner Hanna in Buffalo, New York. The very first day, about 15 of us, if my memory is correct, 15 new guys out of college, and we were treated like college boys. That does not mean with respect. And we're told to dig a ditch probably 3 times as wide as my house, and to carry 100-pound bags of cement on our shoulders. The next day, 2 of us came back. I needed the money, or I would have quit. Wow. I was so. But they also had a dangerous one. They made us work that first day without asbestos suits in front of the furnace. If I ever get lung cancer, I know where it came from. I had on just a t-shirt, working in front of a furnace. My clothes were practically in shreds from flying brands, tremendous heat at that time. And the other young man and myself made it to the end of summer. After 3 days, they knew we were going to stay. All hazing stopped. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah.
They embraced us. They bought us milk because we were big milk drinkers at the time and we had to stay hydrated. Came to my birthday party, these big, strong people, and we bonded. But the hazing was the first thing to drive out the other college students.
Wow, that explains a lot. Now, you've developed a frequently cited list of hazing deaths as well as a map of hazing deaths nationwide. What did you learn through this process of documenting all of this information over the years?
I think the first one was that hazing was encouraged by the educational system. And I'm part of it. I am a past part of it. I had taught at the University of Richmond, Ball State, Franklin College, and it was encouraged as a way to build school spirit. Therefore, it was in the yearbooks, but also, for example, at Cedar Crest College, a female college, very respectable and respected in Pennsylvania, a customs book in the 1930s, which basically told you how to run a kangaroo court. And no, it wasn't alcohol or what we would call criminal hazing, but a young woman by the name of Bird, of course, was made to act like a sparrow and to hop across campus. And then her transgressions, whatever they might be, not wearing a beanie, not wearing the pin, were put on trial in the auditorium. And it was the president at that time, was a wonderful person, worked there for decades, did a lot for the school, who believed in hazing because he had been hazed at Franklin and Marshall when he was a student and was a staunch fraternity person. So that's how it really got in. I really believe if we had a movement like you're leading now with speaking, and our mutual friends in the fraternities, athletics, the parents who've lost their precious children, back then, hazing could have been stopped. It was a lot easier. Deans of students were respected. They were called deans of discipline then, not officially, and they could have been stopped, and it wasn't. So we're here to the present day with hazing a part of the culture, and we're faced with trying to drive it out with a lot more support than the activists had then. And there's a lot more of us. The number of activists then were very, very small, probably laughed at, and certainly ignored.
Wow. Now, you've spoken on the subject of hazing in various areas, including the band, including athletics. So my question is, how is hazing any different in these other student organizations like band and athletics versus the hazing that you're seeing in fraternities and sororities?
Okay, I think it goes from nuances, very small things, onto very big ones. What's in common is it's all about status and power. The power, yes, it's supposed to be all the people in the fraternity or the athletics, the athletic team or whatever, the club, the honor society. But in effect, it's usually the new members who had just been hazed the semester previously or the year previously. And that's where a lot of it comes. But we have seen the same national chapters, without naming any, not have an incident of criminal behavior in their entire history. And then another chapter, for example, in your state at one traditionally African-American historical fraternity, have two deaths. Or a group such as the Texas Cowboys, a spirit group at the University of Texas, very prestigious. They fire Smokey the Cannon. They have some of the elite lawmakers, political representatives, Coach Tom Landry, all these belong to the Texas Cowboy Spirit Group. And now they've had 2 deaths, one a drowning and one an accident coming back from a scavenger hunt, both of them on an alum's property, both of them mirroring each other. So Gabe Higgins was one young man who died in 95, and then this was repeated just 2 years ago with another death. And so it gets into the system, and it gets me to my next part, the one I haven't figured out how to solve, and the one we must solve, and that is the alums. And I talk to a lot of undergraduates, and I will continue to talk to them, and this is where I see the blowback coming that is very difficult. Why? How can a university punish an alum? You can't, maybe you could put a black mark on the transcript, very difficult, and you'd be in court to take away the degree. How does a national punish? I guess they could take away the membership, but who's gonna, you think any of their brothers or sisters, if it's a sorority, are going to stop them from coming to an alumni function years later?
No.
Remember the horror story of an undergraduate president at a big national at the University of Oklahoma being arrested with his kid sister on his shoulders as the police came in. And it was an alum who brought the illegal kegs in. No punishment for the alum, shame and embarrassment for this young man. And I can't imagine what he thought being arrested in front of his kid sister.
Yeah.
I can't imagine anything worse. And so let me throw that as a question at you, Mike. I'd like to learn from you. Do you see the alums as something that we have to address? We've got amazing alums, you know that. I mean, I need to say that first. And it's not the amazing alums who are in the choir with us that we need to reach.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So in one particular instance, of course, I served as executive director of my fraternity. There was some hazing in one particular chapter. I'm not going to name the school, but I went in on behalf of the executive office to work with the chapter, and I invited the alumni in to that session as soon as it was discovered. And we gathered on campus in a large auditorium, both the alumni and the undergraduates. And I presented the evidence that I had that there was some hazing that was going on. And it was really enlightening for the alumni at that time, because they had no idea that the things that I was presenting to them were actually considered hazing today. They said to me, well, these are things that we've been doing for decades. And I'm saying to myself, oh my God. And then just at that moment, you realize how long this has been going on and how much it has been a part of their culture and their chapter for such a long time. So I agree with you. Today, we have speakers that are addressing this with the undergrads on a regular basis. You and I go to these conferences and we work with the undergraduate students. But you raise a fair point, which is, what about the alumni? And I think we would be naive to say that the alumni do not have influence over the undergrads. Of course they do. The alumni have money. The alumni, in many cases, control the housing corporation, so the house that these fraternity men and sorority women are living in. So to say that the undergraduates are not influenced by the alumni and their opinions, I think is naive at best. So, so I agree with you. We have to somehow reach out to the alumni. Hopefully interviews like this, the more that it's shared out there, will help to educate. But we have to figure out how we reach the masses. And perhaps, for example, at conventions, of course, at our national conventions, we discuss the business of the fraternity or the sorority. But I do think that this is also an educational opportunity. We have to make sure that we're teaching not only the undergrads, but also the alumni that are present at conventions, for example, about the dangers of hazing, what is the definition of hazing, examples of hazing, so that way our alumni are teaching the same things that you and I are teaching to the undergrads.
Okay, and then there's a next one that I'll be interested to get your reaction to. So I'm going to give you, I guess, a spoiler into my new book, because I have the research based on some documents that were given to me, extensive documents with chapter minutes, without mentioning the school or fraternity now, but it was one that had a fatality. And what was apparent to me over time, and it wasn't made a big deal of in the minutes, would be the enablers. Who were the enablers? The parents. How many were bringing and donating alcohol and coming back to visit their children? Now, don't get me wrong. I mean, who are some of the biggest activists in the country? The Piazzas, Debbie Smith, the Groovers, going back to Eileen Stevens, who lost her son. Parents have been wonderful, and they're some of the most heard voices at this time by our nationals and by our umbrella conferences. But that's not all the parents. And a lot of them are alums. We're talking about legacies. I don't think we need to define that. And I call them enablers. And I think we need to educate the enablers, and many of them being parents. It needs to be done at the same time, I think. So I guess I would ask you, what's your reaction to that? The idea of addressing the enablers.
It's a very, very fair point. I think as a whole, I think you're right. Most parents want to protect their children. Most parents are aware of the dangers of fraternity and sorority. Most of them, as a whole, I would say, are doing the right thing. Are there parents that return for Parents Weekend? You know, we see these mom days or dad days, and they return to the fraternity house, and they are basically acting a fool at the fraternity house, and you know, let's say drinking to excess, for example, at the fraternity house, and encouraging that type of behavior. It does happen. There's no question in my mind that it does happen. I think ultimately, you're absolutely right. We have to do a better job of making the parents partners in all of this. And I teach this a lot when I talk about recruitment within fraternities and sororities. Many times, for example, if we're going to go out and we have a football coach at Alabama, he wants to recruit, let's say, the star running back for his football team. What does he do? He puts on a suit, he gets in his car, and he goes and has dinner with the parents. And he explains to the parents why their son is a perfect match for Alabama, right? And so I think that the same thing needs to be done within fraternity and sorority recruitment. There's really no reason why. If we know of a man or a woman on campus that can be a future leader in our fraternity or sorority, there's no reason why we shouldn't be engaging the parents in that dialogue to explain why our fraternity or sorority chapter is a perfect match, and here are all the benefits. And if we can articulate that properly to the parents, I feel like all of these other things about, you know, cost of joining an organization and all of these other things will fade to the back, because there is so many benefits of doing fraternity when fraternity is done right. Of course, that is the caveat, right? And so we do have to engage the parents, I think, on the other side of it, which is to say, hey, these are the types of things, this is the values of our organization, and we expect as a parent that you're going to help us to instill these values that are important to us, right? And get the parents buy-in on these values. Do you agree that these things are important, right? Community service, chivalry, scholarship, leadership. Are these important to you? Because these are the things that we're going to be instilling in your son or daughter, right? And getting that buy-in on the front end, and to basically say, we know that there is a dark side to fraternity and sorority. We know that to be true because we see it in movies, we see it on websites, Total Frat Move, all of these other things. This is not something that's congruent with the values of our organization. And we'd like to keep it that way because we want to do fraternity right. And I think getting that buy-in on the front end sets those parameters and those expectations for future behavior. So I think it's on us as fraternity men and sorority women to go and set those expectations on the very front end.
And again, and I would just take it one more step, and that is when we're doing these persuasive talks with the parents, to not be afraid to have important conversations if we detect red flags with the parents. Okay. Well, in my day, start off there, I know I have a red flag, or the way we did it, and we never had a death, and we never took it too far. I know they did something, and we need to address it. Having those very uncomfortable conversations is something that I talk about when I speak on hazing. And I think it's important for undergrads not to be belligerent, but to stand their ground and to be the solid citizens we expect, and to educate the few parents and the few alum, relatively, who are causing the problems. We used to have a saying when I was working and doing articles on foresters: 90% of the people don't go more than 10 feet off the road, in terms of their habits and going into the woods, exploring. 90% of the parents and alums are wonderful, I would think. It's the 10% we have to hammer at.
Yeah.
But the 90% has to join us because they have the power. And then the undergraduates need to come along too, because they're the vulnerable ones. They're the ones that have something very precious to lose: their lives or the lives of their friends. And this is a heck of a thing to take to your grave, to have a stigma like that associated with you.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question. I know you're very proud of the awards that you've received over your lifetime, and there are many. HazingPrevention.org's Hank Nuwer Anti-Hazing Award, the honorary State University of New York honorary degree doctorate that you received, the election to Ball State University Journalism Hall of Fame. Have you thought about your legacy and what is important for people to know about your lifetime body of work?
I think the first is, I believe in longevity, to have a youthful mission and to try to make a difference. So I'm really proud of those, but let me say this. My mentor in my fraternity was Fraser Bragg Drew, who you know about. He was a wonderful professor, very proud fraternity person from the University of Vermont, who still went in his late 80s back to Vermont to meet at the house. And so I had a good knowledge of fraternities from him because he was a fraternity brother at that time, a faculty fraternity brother, but would come to our spaghetti dinners that we did and be a very good role model. That's what I learned from him, and what I would say I would like to get across. The young people need bonding. The older people want to bond. We need to stress the mentoring. This goes back to athletics too, like you're talking about recruiting.
Mm-hmm.
The best players are not only role models, but teachers. And we need to, I think, use that word mentoring a lot more, because that's been the consistent thing for me back in the 60s, 70s, 80s. In my fraternity chapter, we had some great older members. Maybe they might send you on an errand, but mostly they taught you how to stay in school, how to excel, how to get involved in student government, and for me, how to be a better athlete. And that's something I think I would like to pass on as a legacy. The importance of being a mentor, that would be one. And then number two, that when you start out, you're going to not be perfect. You're going to be making mistakes. So the next one is not to expect perfection, not so much to measure yourself against someone else. As a baseball player, I'm sure I did that too much, not to, but to get better yourself over and over. And that's why I like programs such as SIGEP's Balanced Man program, and some of the others that are happening with Phi Delta Theta, so forth, where you try to be the best version of yourself that you can be. And I would like to think that I'm not the same person that way that I was at my 20s, although I can see the roots of it and everything back then, the intensity of playing sports, the intensity of wanting to win if you're in a fraternity intramural contest or something, the intensity to want to be the best chapter on campus. Okay, all those things. But then from there, the intensity to be the best citizen that you can be, to give back to younger people, and to leave and to say, I gave it 100%, gave it my best. Those are the people I admire. And if somebody will say to me at the end, you gave it your best shot, I think that would be enough for my epitaph.
Wow. That's a great message. I hope that we can all live up to that. But that's certainly a great message. You know, I want to ask you, is there hope? There are some in our industry who feel that hazing will only end through some authority figure, right? The fraternity and sorority headquarters, the university, the police, or very rarely through true peer-led change. So in your mind, is that true? How do we stop hazing?
I believe it's all the above. There has to be cross-fertilization and cross-pollination with all of the groups. Because it's too complex a problem, the hazing in Masonic organizations has evolved over time, and it's not as bad as it once was because there aren't as many members out there, but they have to take responsibility because fraternities emulated their customs, their constitutions, and not hazing, but their initiations after the Masonic organizations.
Yes.
Police have to take responsibility. How do you go and arrest 18 and 19-year-olds when you've had hazing in your own, uh, 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 what would you call them, camps or whatever, with academies, in your own academies? How do you deal with it? How do you deal, for example, with me, when I interviewed a prosecuting attorney who declined to charge some young women in a death because they had had an injury in his fraternity. We can't do that. We have to do our jobs, and that's not always pleasant. And so to go back to my point, the parents, the nationals, the Panhellenic organization, that some group that I've worked with, Phi Delta Theta, which I've worked quite a bit with, Bob Biggs, who's a director there, the Dry Fraternity movement, all of us together. Everybody has something to bring to the group, if for want of a better word, and everybody has something to change, to get better on, to reform. And that's going to take some honesty. And I believe we're ready for that. We may not eliminate hazing at this time, but we're ready for honest conversations. And maybe every good thing is accompanied by trouble. Every bad thing is accompanied by something good. Maybe this hiatus that we have right now helps us all really look at our fraternity experience and think, when we're back out there with students, talking to students, working with students, supervising students, or we are students ourselves, what can we do better? And take off any sham of respectability if we're not being a respectable group.
I think you're absolutely right. 100% correct. Now is a great opportunity for fraternity men and sorority women to work on our value proposition, because now, especially with COVID-19 and this pandemic, it's very possible we might start out in the fall semester with online classes. And so if fraternity men and sorority women are no longer doing their social events, we're going to have to really refine that value proposition if we're going to retain and attract more members into our organization. So I think now is a very, very good time for us to look at our value proposition, make sure that it's still valid, it's still relevant, make sure that all of our members can articulate what that value proposition really is, and to revisit all of this, because I think it's paramount to the success of fraternities and sororities going forward.
Yes, and we're not going to have Moses come down from Sinai with a plate or a rock to have 10 things we must do. We must figure it out ourselves, because in a way, I think this is much worse than the 1919 flu epidemic. We're having so many losses. We're going to see so many liberal arts schools go under. We're going to need to come together as a country and a world in a way that I think we're capable, but we must do it. What I worry about now is that we will go into splinter groups, into national cliques, or campus cliques or whatever. That would be absolutely the wrong thing. We always talk about world peace and all of these ideals. This is a time for idealism and functionality. We have to combine the two, and we have to take care of one another. I'm doing a biography of Kurt Vonnegut, and to take the one message that he always gave that I really believe in, excuse my language, damn it, you've got to be kind. He said that over and over again. Kindness is very important at this time, and hazing has nothing to do with kindness. It's a form for me of domestic abuse when it happens in a fraternity house or sorority house, because we're a family.
Yeah. And let me just say also to the administrators that are listening today, I do believe that fraternity and sorority will play a role in helping universities open up in the fall or in the spring of 2021, whatever that time is. I do believe that fraternity and sorority have significant value for us to help open these higher up institutions up, in that I think they can help us with retention of the existing students that are on campus, and also engagement of, let's say, the freshmen that are going to be coming to our campuses in the fall. Fraternity and sorority, they are great at relationships. So I think they could be on the front lines. They should be on the front lines talking to these students, welcoming them to our campus, and really, just helping to assist with that transition into college life. So I think we have a wonderful opportunity for fraternities and sororities right now.
I agree completely, because what we'll have 20 to 23% or so of undergraduates without any orientation or with limited orientation at this particular time. It really behooves the sophomores, juniors, and seniors, and particularly the juniors and seniors, to step in, but also the alums, to try to give guidance to these undergrads. My life would have been so much different if Fraser Drew hadn't directed me. He was very, very blunt. You're not a bad baseball player, but you don't seem to be able to hit the curve. You can write, become an author. What? I can't hit the curve? But he's right. But he told the truth, but he also gave optimism. He gave a path, and we need to do this as sophomores, juniors, alums, nationals, to our students, especially, God forbid, as you mentioned, we don't start back till January of 22. Very possible, I'm afraid, Mike.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. This has been really great. Now, I do want to talk about food because both of us share this love of food, So what's your favorite restaurant? And two places I want to talk about. Number one, Warsaw, Poland, and also Indianapolis. What are your favorite spots to go and get food?
Okay, well, the favorite spot of all right now, I can tell you, because in my kitchen, the smell of venison is wafting out to me. I have a roast in the kitchen that we're going to have for supper. But having said that, in nearby Indianapolis, St. Elmo's is a favorite place to meet. And what do I like there? Everything from the shrimp appetizers, which, if you don't like spicy food, horseradish in it, you'll have to learn to like it, because it's so good, but it will wake you up. And of course, the steaks are to die for, and they're about the size of Georgia, and you may, if you go in there without a big appetite, ask for a half portion, because it's very generous. And then you've got the waiters who've been there since before I was a fraternity member, maybe since Lincoln was running for president, that are still there, very dignified, and mostly they don't have any order at all. You tell them you have 10 people. I remember from Phi Delta Theta meeting there, 10 people at a table. They didn't write anything down. They came back with all the orders. How
Amazing.
do you do that?
I don't know.
Amazing. So that's my favorite in Indianapolis.
All right, good.
Okay,
And what about Warsaw, Poland, too?
Okay, so I'll give some background to the readers. I'm married to Melgorzoda Verbulska Nuwer, whose name strikes terror at the desks of airports when she tries to check in for a plane. They can't spell all three names. And we met in Warsaw. My grandfather was an orphan, was in Warsaw, was hazed violently in the Russian military at that time, escaped with bullets running all around. And I met my wife when I went back to Warsaw to get back into my roots. Our very first place she took me to, I had to write these down, she helped me with it, was Zapieczek, which is a little hard to pronounce, which is one of several pierogi places that are in Poland. I know you know with your heritage about pierogis.
Oh,
you
yes.
have toast with potatoes, with cheese. You get the best soup, zupa, with sausages. It's called żurek at this place. That's one. Okay. Number two, I do like spicy foods. And I love the Indian restaurant Guru, which my friend Anna took my wife and myself to eat there. And very, very attentive waiters, a very big menu list, and authentic Indian food. Every step of the way. Just the perfect place to be. Now, the other one is very hard to pronounce. It's Bazylik. I'll spell it for you. Bazylisk. Bazyliszek, if you're looking up on the web. And we were there for New Year's about 3 years ago. Every dish known to mankind was out on the table, huge. You look out the beautiful windows in Old Town, you see people skating. You go there in the summer as we did, and they have tables set out. It's right on the town square. And Warsaw, if your listeners do not know, was completely destroyed, the old town, in the 40s by the Nazis, burned to the ground because there were the rebellions and the ghettos. And I really admire these people, and I'm doing a lot of reading about that era. And it's been completely rebuilt. And it's one of the most beautiful places you can take a vacation to, especially if you're in Eder. And you've got monuments nearby. And as you may have mentioned, I give lectures internationally. I've spoken twice in Poland the last year to universities. One, to go back to our early subject, on hazing among correctional officers and hazing among prisoners. So it's a very broad subject. But while I'm in Warsaw all the time, I have to come back and go on a diet because there's too many good restaurants and too much good food. So I'll give one endorsement here. If you've never been to Poland, go to Warsaw Old Town and go to one of these restaurants. You will love it, Mike.
That's fantastic. Well, I'm finding out we have the exact same palate in terms of foods. So if you want to make Hank and I happy, just serve us spicy foods and a steady diet of pierogies, and we're going to be whatever you want. That's great. That's great. So, all right. So, Hank, so where can our audience go to connect with you and to read more about your work? Where should they go?
Okay. In terms of the easiest way, if you would just like to lend support by sending me an email, the website is completely done as my philanthropy, which I've been doing now since the 1970s. And take a look at hazing in all these different groups and look at how far back it goes and look at the patterns, how alcohol entered, and to know that, for example, we didn't have a single hazing death from alcohol until 1940, Hubert Spake, University of Missouri, and now how it's such a big part of the overall group. So look for the trends. That's hanknuwer.com. Go to the top and choose where you want to go, including a link that goes to Greek University. Number two would be the books. I just happen to have them on my table.
All right, good planning.
So here's one near and dear to my heart. and it goes into the behavior of fraternities, sororities, and it's done journalistically, but also because I'm so involved in behavior, and now writing for a sociology textbook, a book on fraternities and gender right now, co-writing with Elizabeth Allen from stophazing.org. This was the first one that started, was Broken Pledges, The Deadly Rite of Hazing, the first book. And it's the story of a wonderful woman named Eileen Stevens who lost her son, Chuck, at Alfred University. The big part, however, is that Alfred University, after having this stigma, stepped up its hazing research, did a key high school hazing survey, and one on collegiate members under Dr. Norm Pollard and other researchers, and allowed me to be part of it. And I think this is unprecedented. What school invites an investigative reporter who did everything about your sins from the 1978 and invites you in the 90s to be a part of something good to try to eradicate hazing? And then the final one is the new book, Hazing, Destroying Young Lives. And I'm the editor on this, and some well-known names that I'm sure you're familiar with: Michael Kimmel, the sociologist, Travis Apgar, a anti-hazing hero for sure, Tracy Maxwell, Dave Westall, Bob Biggs, have all contributed chapters to this book. We have chapters by a PR expert named Ray Begovich talking with fraternities about your reputation and how to make it better and what happens when hazing enters. So it's kind of a one size fits all to handling the hazing issue. And it pulls no punches. I mean, it talks about all the deaths and doesn't leave anything out, but it also looks for the positive side of fraternities. I'm a journalist. I try to be balanced. I don't believe in fake news, but I believe in fairness. And I think it's a fair book, I hope.
Wow. I've learned a great deal at this interview here today. I always do every time we talk. I always learn something new. So I appreciate all of the time that you've taken here today, and I appreciate your lifetime body of work. Again, I mean, without the work and the research that you've done, a lot of us wouldn't have a leg to stand on, quite frankly. And so we're really leaning on your research in order to help educate today's college students. And then, of course, hopefully that's going to translate to the alumni and to the parents, as we've talked about. So I appreciate all of your time. I appreciate all of your work. And I'm just excited to know you and to work with you going forward, and to watch as you start broadening your message to college students all over the country, certainly with Greek University. So if anybody wants to read your bio and see some of the programs that you're delivering on college campuses today, just go to greekuniversity.org/Hank. And you'll see everything that you need to know about his bio and his programs. And then, of course, just let me know, and we'll arrange to have Hank on your college campus. Or if you want to do something now during the time of COVID-19, he's also available immediately right now. We can do a virtual presentation on Zoom with up to 1,000 of your college students. So he's available right now. He's available in the future once the college campuses start to open up. But it's a great resource for your college students to hear it directly from Hank Nuwer, directly from the source. And I hope that a lot of college campuses are going to take you up on that offer.
Okay, and I always learn something every time I go to a college campus, because I go to the library, I go to the archives, I try to talk to historians. I learn from these visits very, very much. And I've really enjoyed talking to you about food, one of my favorite topics. I wish you were here, Mike, to be in my kitchen and have venison roast today.
Oh my God. I'm not going to tell you that venison is my favorite type of meat to eat. So yeah, I'm very jealous. Send my best to your wife, and look forward to more conversations. Thank you so much for your time, Hank. And thank you so much to our audience for listening. If you like this, please share this with somebody else who would get some value out of this interview. Thank you so much for listening. Bye for now.
Okay. Dziękuję bardzo, Michał.